Want to be a part of the reinvention of health and medicine? Attend Exponential Medicine, a unique and intensive 4-day experience that gathers world-class faculty, innovators, and organizations from across the biomedical and technology spectrum. Exponential Medicine 2019 will be held November 4th through November 7th in San Diego. Visit exponentialmedicine.com for details and use Medscape for a $250 discount code applied on the final step of the application.
Hello, this is Eric Topol, and welcome to a new podcast segment, Medicine and the Machine. I'm with Abraham Verghese, and today we're going to delve into a recent New Yorker essay, Should Doctors Organize? So, Abraham, I wrote it. I'm really interested. We haven't spoken. What was your take on the whole thing?
Well, first of all, I was just thrilled for you because I think as a writer, to break into the New Yorker, I think is still a beautiful thing. And I very much remember that moment. So I hope you were very pleased with the fact that you cracked that nut and got in there, because I think that portends very well. So I'd love to talk to you about two different things, if you don't mind.
Oh, of course. Thank you. Yeah.
One is I'd like to talk about, the writing process and the mechanics of working with the New Yorker. My memory of it is, it's just a wonderful experience to be working with people who take so much trouble on the written word and every little sentence and the fact checker. So tell us a little bit about what that was like for you.
Right. Yeah, I think it's fun to get into that because I haven't discussed it actually with anyone. Before we get into the impact on medicine and the machine. So I had never had fact checking like this in all the years of writing, more than 3 decades of writing. And what was amazing is every word was fact checked. So there was a fellow named Melvin who was assigned to fact checking. And this is just beyond the beyond. So I had cited, articles in, for example, the Washington Post. And he said, well, that's not good enough. I need to go to the source. I need the PDF of what the Washington Post said. Okay. And then I, as you may recall, I reviewed the experience I had while at UC San Francisco as a resident, when I was picketing, or there was an organized protest about the nursing shortage. And he wanted to know, Melvin, who were the other residents to verify that this had occurred. And that he contacted them. And so I gave him the name of one, and turns out he remembered it, but he wasn't at the San Francisco General Hospital. So he had to give him the names of 2 others, which Mel contacted to confirm that this had occurred. Well, then we got to the one I had written as a long member of the American College. So he called the American College of Cardiology to see if I was a member. And the president spoke to him and said, well, I have to get back to you on that. And he sent me an email, the ACC president, that I need to call him right away. So I call him. I can't believe this. And he said, you have to pay your dues, or I can't say that you're a member. So that's just, he also, this fact checking went to the extent of, contacting Medicare directly, contacting the Bureau of Labor Statistics directly about the ratio of administrators and the numbers to physicians. So this was a grueling experience that took many, many hours, not just of, verbal communication, but back and forth email, sources, getting PDFs sent. And what it gave me was a deep respect for this medium. That is, I've never seen anything like it. And so I wish everything could be fact checked like that. It takes longer. It's a process for sure, but you don't see this kind of thing. Certainly the extent of it.
Especially in this day and age when, facts are flying so loosely on the national level. It is just so refreshing to encounter this. And the other thing that I felt strongly, and I've written both fiction and nonfiction for them, is the worry they would take over a punctuation mark and, the particular word choice. It was really beautiful. It was a reminder of, how seriously you can and should take writing. It makes me wonder also about our journals and our peer review. In many ways, I think we don't have that kind of fact checking, but we count on the fact that readership will quickly respond with letters to the editor if we're way off base. But we never really have that kind of fact checking, not even the reference checking.
You're absolutely right. We don't. I had an evening recently with Carl Zimmer, the science journalist for the New York Times, and he told me that, during his career, the type of legendary fact checking that was at the New Yorker was simulated by many other magazines and media, but over time, because of the constraints of funding, they just couldn't support the human resources to do it. And it's a shame because, as you say, there's so much difficulty now in differentiating the truth, the gray zone, and the actual facts. So it's good to see that there still is at least some emphasis on that.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, let's get into your piece. And I love the way that you launched into it, because it was about a topic that's very dear to my heart, which is, the whole issue of gun-related violence and what role medical personnel, students, physicians have in this. And there's been a very active chapter here at Stanford, started by our students, but also championed by our faculty, especially Dean Winslow, who was, a distinguished, who is a former distinguished military officer, as well as a wonderful infectious disease physician. And I think he was appearing on a congressional hearing to be an undersecretary for defense under Mattis, with whom he had served. And he was asked about guns, and he candidly said, I don't see why assault-type weapons should have any business in civilian life. Well, that was the end of his hearing, that was the end of it. And but anyway, that's the lead that you use for the piece. And could you sort of tell us about that? Because that's really was what led you to this argument, it would seem.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. That was, to me, a real turning point, watching physicians come together against the NRA. So when the Annals of Internal Medicine, ACP, put out the guidelines about the way doctors should tackle the gun practices, and specifically, be concerned about guns in patients' homes, and that assault rifles should be banned, and all these sorts of matters. Of course, the NRA had that response. These doctors should stay in their lane. And then you saw, of course, the extraordinary response, the solidarity, the likes of which I've never seen.
Yeah.
And it was not just, of course, social media. It was TV, and it was in the written word. It was newspapers. It was everywhere. So that, to me, gave me a sense that we're at a different time in medicine. And this is the fact that so many prominent physicians were then posting pictures of themselves, just splatter with blood, all the things that were bringing out the emotional side of what it's like to be a doctor, to care for patients who have suffered gunshots. So, this was, to me, a really, at the same time thinking, well, what about the Parkland High School teenagers? And look what they've done. And not that, of course, we've gotten the laws changed, even though, 90% or more Americans want them to be changed. But it got to the sense that, why aren't we having more activism? And I tried to think back in my, over the many years, and the only other time I could remember was the strike in front of San Francisco General Hospital.
Yeah, tell us about that. I mean, that sounds like the year that I was also a house officer. This was 1981, was it?
Right. It's kind of funny because it brought that back to mind. And the story there is that, if you look back at the pictures, in fact, the New Yorker was thinking about publishing the pictures of the residents, but then they have to get permission. But a lot of them look like hippie freaks with their hair down at their waist, but
they're all distinguished professors now with much less hair, I assure you.
Yeah, there you go. But the funny thing about it was that the strike was for a number of things. The nursing shortage was one, and on the list was child care, a better meals, better food, and a pool table or a ping pong table. I mean, it's just silly things. But what was interesting is the chief of medicine, Merle Sandy at the time, he was just enraged, and he came out with a bullhorn and told everybody to get back to work, and they just refused. And so it led to, some pretty serious confrontations that extended even beyond the strike. And what I learned from it was this kind of, I've heard now from many other people that they've had, small gatherings like this in their experiences, whether training or subsequently. But it's a very unusual matter because most times, as you know, doctors are busy. They're taking care of their patients and their other activities, as we've discussed in prior episodes, like data clerk work. So they just don't come together for many purposes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the trouble is that doctors are perceived as having, great lifestyles, and unions are seen as the bread and butter of the blue collar worker. And I think over the years, as doctors have lost more and more autonomy and have wanted to organize, perhaps they've come up against the obstacles of there's no popularity around doctors going on strike. I mean, immediately there's a sense of alarm, or are there going to be patients affected, and so on. So it's been a very curious phenomenon to observe, whereas everybody else in the hospital is very well organized. The nurses are incredibly organized, and that union, I think, from what I'm reading, is just gaining in numbers every year and bringing about concessions that are important to them, but not so with medicine.
Right. It's true. And it's, when you look at the landscape, the fact that we have no entity that represents even half of doctors, no less all, is, I think, a big shortcoming. And, the gravitas of having most doctors unified for purposes that are different than professional organizations as they exist today, which are largely concerned with the interests of the doctors rather than the patients and that relationship. So, I think there's a potential here. It was interesting, Abraham, to get some tough responses from the ACC to the. They wrote a letter to the New Yorker. They wrote to me. They called me, and they tried to put a list of all the patient-centered activities, and I still haven't found any that they, despite their list, they just that's just representative of the problem, not thinking about what an organization could do today in terms of prioritizing time with patients. The essence, the as you say, the presence, the human element that has largely been compromised. And I don't know any organization yet that has stood up for that among doctors.
Yeah, and I think the trouble is that because so many of our professional organizations, and I think this is true of almost all of them, they were supported by membership who really wanted them to be at the table in Washington and make sure that, that the interests of the membership were not being hurt. So it was all about the bottom line. It was all about, each specialty making sure that it was not being hurt by whatever was coming down the pike. And so I think when Congress and are just sort of so used to us lobbying for money, when you turn the argument away from money to something else, we've already lost credibility. I don't think they're listening very well when we talk, for example, about gun violence, when they should be listening. No one else sees it quite the way we at the front line would see it.
Right. All right. No, and I think the other thing that brought to mind how vital this is, at this juncture, as we talked about, we haven't never gotten the gun thing right. It's such a remarkable void of action for decades now. And then we keep seeing the mass shootings and deaths, and we're such an outlier in the world. But, at the same time, there's this ability that we have to potentially get medicine on track. And that, of course, as we've discussed, the ability to use leaning on machines to decompress the work of doctors, to also to organize things better for doctors, and also to outsource more to the patients who want to take this stuff on. But if we don't do something different, the squeeze will continue, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, the trope for so long, for 10 years at least, is how many of us are miserable about the electronic medical record, and how many of us are, leaving medicine. The fact is that you and I have, very good jobs, very satisfying organizations to be working for, but universally, everybody's struggling with the electronic medical record. And what if the hundreds of thousands, almost 1 million physicians out there, I read from your paper, I think.
Yeah, fact checked, right?
If 1 million people got together and said, you know what, today's a paper day, we're only going to write things on paper today, I think we'd get some attention, because I think it's just been felt as though, well, you just got to do this is the way it is. And, I think the misery that it's caused over the last decade or more could perhaps have been avoided if we had a much stronger say in what was being brought down and given to physicians to use.
Want to be a part of the reinvention of health and medicine? Attend Exponential Medicine, a unique and intensive 4-day experience that gathers world-class faculty, innovators, and organizations from across the biomedical and technology spectrum. Exponential Medicine 2019 will be held November 4th through November 7th in San Diego. Visit exponentialmedicine.com for details and use Medscape for a $250 discount code applied on the final step of the application.
There was a really interesting essay in the Annals of Internal Medicine by a physician named Diana Pai. I don't know her. She works in Ohio, but was fascinating. And she wrote how she was working, and then the administrators who she was working for said that her new patient slots would only be 20 minutes. So she quit, and she realized that, in her world, that, without having to deal with the ability not to provide care, that she, things got better for her, but then she yearned to care for patients again. And she went to a free clinic, and there the people said, just take your time. However long it takes, right?
Yeah.
And she's completely recharged, rejuvenated, and enjoying the practice of medicine again. And it was extraordinary to read that. And, of course, that's the sense, is that there's not enough time. But the disenchantment factor, you don't see that as what current professional organizations are talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
There's none of that concern. It's just folding into the business of medicine and being, a party to it, basically part of the conduit. It's really disenchanting. The other thing that, I think is really noteworthy is that there's this abuse of the term patient-centric. It's used for so many things that aren't. So, the question is, how do we get back to this better state of real medicine?
I think the challenge too is that we're not talking about, this is not truckers. This is not one sort of discrete entity. There's so many different roles that physicians play, and each hospital, each medical organization is so different that even though we are 1 million strong, trying to make that number of 1 million work around one issue is going to be incredibly hard, especially if it's a local issue like your electronic medical record, which might be very different than mine. And I think I read that the AMA in 1999 actually created a physicians union that was called the Physicians for Responsible Negotiation, which was basically vowing never to strike, because that went against the norm of our vow to the patient, which I must say that all the strikes I've read about, no patient care was ever seriously jeopardized. Critical care was maintained, but at a certain point, I think the patient discomfort and the pushback that comes has always weakened the ability to form unions. But
well, and of course, I avoided the term unions because they have a negative connotation, of course. And the other question is, how do you go forward with this? And I didn't know that this could take shape. But what's fascinating, Abraham, is so many physicians have contacted me who would like to take the helm, be very active in support of this. So already a few are getting organized to take the lead. And we've talked about, well, should it be a $1 or $5 membership fee? Which is a little different than normal membership, just to say, you're in it.
yeah.
There will be some formation, charters and legal fees, registration for, a nonprofit entity. So there has to be at least a little bit of support. But the goal would be, if we can get there and get as many of the million physicians as possible, is to take on this initiative to stand up for the patient-doctor relationship, to get behind the things that really matter, kind of back to the future of medicine. But also there's that other potential that, I touched on, which is there's so many things that are not countered today, like all the misinformation about vaccines, for example, or supplements, or, this, obviously the guns standing up together, that, this organization, could actually have, stay narrow in its focus, but by standing up for patients, there's some other matters that have been left basically untouched.
Now, I read in your article, and therefore looked it up, there is a union of American dentists and physicians that you mentioned, not a very large membership. From your understanding, what would be the limitation of that existing organization as a union?
Yeah, I think the problem is there's lots of these little unions and little organizations. Some of them, at least a couple, in fact, had a mission that wasn't so different than what was articulated, but they're very small. Many have been around for a long time. They've never developed momentum. And, I think one of the issues is starting something afresh with, the idea of, 1,000, 10,000, or 100,000 is not going to do it. It has to be as close to the majority or complete presence of the physician community as possible. So one of the problems we've had is that even though there have been many over the years of entities, most of them have not been in alignment with this goal. And they actually, many have disbanded along the way. And, there's nothing that really has developed any momentum over time. And also, the last thing we want to do is have another financial hit to doctors. So this has to be, if not free, close to that. So there's no burden attached to it. I think this is really important.
I love the fact that as you're thinking of this, it's really about the primacy of the patient-physician relationship and the time with the patient. And I think as long as that's front and center, and then you get the numbers, then you can actually make an impact on some of the other things that are perhaps of less concern to the patient, but critically important to the health and well-being of the people caring for them. That's a great idea, I think.
Yeah, I thanks. I think that's got to be the center. It's got to be the principal objective. And it's the difference is in the medical world is that we are largely beholden to administrators, our overlords. Whereas, in the rest of professions, that's not the case. there are, as you well know, many organizations, health systems in the U.S. where there is a physician at the helm, but those are the exceptions. Most of the time, the bean counters are not physicians. And in fact, as pointed out, the performance metrics of those where there's a physician leadership, actually, there are many papers on that show that to be an advantage. But nonetheless, the point being is that we're in a peculiar situation where doctors have been essentially subservient to administrators whose principal interest is delivering the goods, the financial goods. And that's a problem. And we have to somehow come up with a counter to that. Whether AI could replace a lot of the administrators, I don't know. But, that is a problem that we haven't yet, the creep that's occurred. 3,200% increase of administrators, which was verified by the fact checker directly with BLS.gov, versus the 150%. So we're talking about 2 orders of magnitude more of administrators, and they not involved at all with patient care. And here we are lacking time with patients. Isn't something wrong with that picture?
It's amazing. Yeah. And I think the reason that that's the case is that the opportunity to push back at managed care way back, there were lots of fears amongst physicians that, if managed care came along, it was basically going to put in charge people who were going to make an efficient organization at the expense of the very things we care about, not just income. And we lost that battle because there was no union at that time. There was no organization. And that's why we're in this situation where we're not autonomous by any means, even though we like to think we are.
You're absolutely right. That was a big hit. It didn't have much pushback. Then there was the RVU, which again, the organizations like the AMA participated in that, which further devalued and basically barcoded visits and prioritized the ones with procedures for better financial remuneration. And then, of course, the latest one that we've spoken about in a prior podcast has been the EHR and the keyboard and whatnot. So we have weathered through, I wouldn't say favorably, many different profound hits to medical practice. And perhaps this is the moment we can begin to turn things around. I know many think that's overly optimistic, but better not to lose hope, I guess.
And I like the way that, the way your piece started, which is the way that we might, sort of bring this to a conclusion, is that it happened organically, that being told to stay in lane just rankled with so many physicians that it brought them together around this hashtag of, this is my lane. Don't ask me to stay in lane. And I think capitalizing on that, Eric, with your article and the discussion that's ensuing, to create a unified voice around just the best values of being a physician is truly a powerful thing we could do.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. The one other thing I'd add before we close up is, in watching who were many of the leaders in that NRA pushback, this is our lane. Of course, some of them were men, like Joe Saccharin in Baltimore, Hopkins, but many of them were women, and many of the women have become the leading activists on social media about medical matters. So you wonder now whether the fact that, because women have in many ways not had the voice that they should have in medicine over the years, that you're seeing some really shine through. And also the other demographic besides gender is younger people,
yes.
younger than you and I.
Very much so, yeah.
And so the fact they're savvy on social media, and so these are favorable things, I think, that we might see this standing up for the patient-doctor relationship, because I think all of us know how precious it is, and how when we have a chance to bond and have the time, and it's rejuvenating.
Absolutely.
So, hopefully we're seeing some of the threads with respect to that, for other matters, for the right kind of people, that there are some that are already now willing to get engaged and put their time and energy into this. So, I'm hoping it'll come together.
I'm sure it will, Eric. And what is your next piece that you have in mind to try with the New Yorker?
Well,
you're on a roll.
Yeah, I don't know. It could be the end of one. But what we've talked about is the 7-Eleven or the McDonald's syndrome of American medicine, where you have such profound decentralization. And the idea there is that I've experienced it in choosing where to have a medical procedure or an encounter, as has my wife and family. And the fact that we have these, every strip malls, every corner, we have medical facilities, I think that somehow that is part of the business of medicine that hasn't been reviewed adequately as to how that's led to another big compromise. So that's what I'm working on now. We'll see how it comes together. It's in the early stages.
Wonderful. Well, again, congratulations. It's a lovely piece and so thought-provoking. And I can just tell you from the discussion at Stanford, first of all, I'm struck by how many people read the New Yorker and also how much discussion this particular piece has generated. So very gratifying to be having this conversation with you about this.
Well, I really appreciate that. That's very kind of you. And we'll look forward to our next coming together on the machine and medicine, or medicine and the machine, I should say. And Abraham, thanks as always. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Eric.